and they may want to know why the camera is there, and that's absolutely fine. For myself, I'm quite happy to tell people what I'm doing and why I'm doing it, but that's as far as it will go. Unless I'm breaking the law, then there's no reason for me to give any other information. Outside of a school, again, you think about TV programs and the news and things like that, documentaries. You think how many times the cameras have been set up outside of a school. I have not filmed outside of a school. And if I was filming outside of a school and if I was set up outside of a school filming, I personally would have to be there for a good reason. I wouldn't just go and do it randomly, for example. Even if I did, there's no law against it. In fact, most of the kids, imagine it, most of the children coming out of a school will be interested in why the camera's there, more than feeling alarmed, harassed and distressed. As the police like to say, if you're not doing anything wrong, what have you got to hide? So why would somebody be concerned if you're doing nothing wrong? If you're just going about your daily business, then why would there be a problem? Why would you feel alarmed, harassed and distressed? Moving on, I've also asked myself the question of how likely it is that those people would feel uncomfortable. Would they find the actions of the person photographing or filming them acceptable? Has Mr. Elliott considered whether he would feel comfortable being filmed or photographed without his consent? And I'll refer to my previous statements. We are filmed and photographed multiple times a day without even knowing about it. I know that it happens, but I don't know when it happens. I don't know what camera is looking at me, but on recording me at any particular time. So I just have to accept the fact that I'm being monitored, as we all are. If somebody was taking a picture in the street, I'm more likely to go and photobomb, and get in their picture than turn around and walk the other way fearing for my safety or feeling alarmed, harassed and distressed. Crazy. Having given this point some careful consideration, I believe that it is more likely than not that a reasonable person would question the actions of Mr. Elliott in such circumstances as presented on the 20th of the 2nd, 19. I had no issue with the police questioning me. I told them what I was doing, why I was doing it, how long I was going to be there doing it. But because I stopped short of giving up my anonymity, which I'm perfectly entitled to keep to myself, they didn't like it. The first police officer couldn't do anything about it. He even spoke to his sergeant and eventually told me that I was being left to do what I was doing. In any normal, reasonable person, seeing as we're talking about any reasonable person or member of the public, if you was doing something and a police officer allowed you to continue doing it, any reasonable person or member of the public would assume that then it's perfectly legal for you to do. You see, officer, I can use your arguments back against you because you're talking shit. Anyway, having reviewed the evidence in this case, I have considered the points raised by Mr. Elliott. I am satisfied that once the actions of Mr. Elliott were seen or reported, officers had a duty to protect their colleagues and the wider community. They had a duty to question Mr. Elliott to find out what he was doing and why he was doing it. Had officers failed to act, I'm satisfied that they would have been in clear neglect of their duty. So, they had a duty to question Mr. Elliott and find out what he was doing and why he was doing it. But they didn't have a duty, clearly, because you've stated it here, they didn't have a duty to question me, find out what I was doing, why I was doing it, and who I was. So clearly the who I was part wasn't important, but yet I was arrested for not giving my details. Officers and staff did not know who Mr. Elliott was, nor did they know why he was filming and what he was doing with the images that he had recorded, and as such I can understand the concerns of the officers. So great were the concerns that arrangements were made at Crosby Police Station for officers and staff to use another egress point to avoid their images and vehicles registrations being captured by Mr. Elliott. Well, first of all, they did know what and why I was there. I told multiple police officers, 6, 7, maybe 8 times I explained what and why I was there. So yes, they all knew what I was doing. As for the arrangements to open another egress point, I did, in my initial subject access request to Merseyside Police, ask for the camera that overlooked the car parks and entrance and exits from the police compound. Strangely enough, that was not supplied to me with the rest of the information. Therefore, seeing as this is supposed to be based on evidence and fact, I would suggest that there is no evidence that that other gate was open. Specifically because while I was being questioned by the police and surrounded, there were still vehicles entering and exiting from the gate where I was stood. Now, seeing as the police like to use on the basis of probabilities, I would suggest on the basis of probabilities that the second egress point that was supposedly open was in fact not opened, and that that was an outright lie, based on the probability that you have no evidence that it was open, and based on the probability that the fact that people were coming in and out of the station from the gate where I was stood proves that they weren't going in and out of another gate. Having satisfied myself with that the officers were right to approach and question Mr. Elliott, I have then considered whether the arrest was necessary or lawful. Now again, I've not said that the police officers weren't right in asking me what I was doing. My issue is because they did not understand what I was doing, which is not my fault, it's not my problem, because they did not understand it and because they did not like the fact that I was standing up for myself, that is the issue that I have. I do not have the issue with them approaching and questioning me with regards to my activity. But after I explained what I was doing in detail in some instances, I should have been left to do it like I was with the first police officer. It is for a court of law to determine whether an arrest is lawful. So I have therefore reviewed the evidence in the case to determine whether the arrest was necessary, having regard for all of the circumstances. Well, seeing as professional standards and this idiot can't determine whether the arrest was lawful, then I think maybe I'm going to have to take this to court myself and see what a court has to say about it being lawful. Constable Hunt was tasked to speak to Mr. Elliott to establish why he was outside Crosby Police Station, filming, taking photographs. The incident was captured on police body-worn video. I can confirm that as part of this appeal, I have reviewed the footage in full. Well, Constable Hunt was not tasked to speak to Mr. Elliott, and I can tell you that quite confidently, because when PC Hunt leaves the police station, he leaves in a vehicle. None of the other officers that came out of the station came in a vehicle. They came out on foot. But PC Hunt and PC Williams came out in a vehicle. As they drew close to me, as they came through the gates and they drew close to me, you can clearly hear and see that the engine noise indicates that they were picking up speed rather than slowing down. In fact, they even, as they drove past myself and the officer I was speaking to at the time, the officer I was speaking to had to flag the car down. He put his hand up and asked PC Hunt and PC Williams to stop, which they did, and they stopped just off camera, blocking the entrance. Or I say blocking the entrance, there may have been room on the far side of them in the gap for a car to go in and out, but they were parked in between the wall where the driveway into the police compound was. If an officer had come out specifically to speak to me, it is my belief that they would not have stopped there. They would have stopped somewhere that was not going to cause an obstruction, such as PC Marshall did when he got out and spoke to me in video 1, link in the description. Also, PC Hunt's body-worn video camera only starts after he was flagged down. If he was on his way out to see me specifically, the chances are he would have turned his camera on before he parked his vehicle next to me. Specifically because I could have ran away and he may have wanted video footage of me to identify me at a later stage. So I would suggest and I would put forward that Police Constable Hunt was not actually there specifically to speak to me. Moving on, having reviewed the footage, I'm satisfied that the officers Hunt and Thompson calmly and politely approached Mr. Elliott and spoke to him clearly, pointing out and explaining the reasons for their concerns. This provided Mr. Elliott with a clear opportunity to assist and cooperate with their inquiries.
Hello sir, you okay?
I'm fine, thank you. You
alright? Can I ask what you're doing?
For the 8th time, I'm getting stock footage
Okay,
of police cars.
Right, brilliant.
Do you mind?
Yeah, I do. Because you're getting personal plates of police officers and police vehicles.
And then, because of my reply, they didn't like it. So Constable Hunt then decided to be a petulant child and tell me to get my gear off of the wall that it was on.
And we think that's suspicious, to be honest.
You think it's suspicious taking photograph or video?
Could you take the equipment off the wall that isn't yours as well, please? And not set it up here.
Okay.
Thank you. That's appreciated.
Now, the wall doesn't belong to the police station, by the way. So I just want to make that clear. Plus, there was no indication that any criminal damage may have occurred or would have occurred or had occurred through my resting a soft bag and a tripod on the wall. The way that he spoke to me was not politely. He spoke to me like I was some sort of fucking idiot. And when I'm spoken to in that manner, I will respond in that manner. Something you police officers fail to realise. If you give people respect, they will respect you back. But you seem to think you're above everybody else and you're better than everybody else. And you can talk to people how you want, and you cannot. So this provided Mr. Elliott with clear opportunity to assist and cooperate with their inquiries, and I did cooperate. I told them what I was doing, why I was doing it. I refused to give my personal information at this time. Having reviewed the evidence in this case, which includes a copy of the investigation report released to Mr. Elliott and his solicitor at the conclusion of the complaint investigation, I'm satisfied that the concerns of all of the officers, including those who initially reported the presence of Mr. Elliott outside of the police station, was explained in full. It is the report and summary of the accounts of all the staff involved upon which I rely when stating that I failed to see how any reasonable person could not understand why the actions of Mr. Elliott would not cause harassment, alarm and distress. Well, I've already been through that. Any normal, reasonable person coming out of a supermarket, out of a workplace, and they see somebody with a camera set up on a tripod, videoing something, they're probably just going to come out and walk on and get on with their day, get on with doing whatever they're doing. They may be inquisitive and want to know what it is that somebody's doing, but it's most certainly would not cause alarm, harassment and distress. Absolutely not. Not to a reasonable person. Police officers are like any other members of society.
Really?
And as such are entitled to a private life. Absolutely. You can have your private life. I wasn't trying to take your private life away from you. I wasn't trying to invade your privacy. But the problem is, there is no expectation of privacy in public, and you were in public, and so was I. Therefore, as the police station camera was videoing me at the time I was there, there is nothing wrong with me videoing you as you were there, in view, in public. They can be subject to harassment, alarm and distress like everybody else. Any reasonable person would understand that. As well as being police officers, they are individuals with families who require and are entitled to the same legal protection as every other member of society. So where's my legal protection for my rights? Where is my legal protection for my rights to collect and disseminate information? There is no law against photography in public. There is no law. Otherwise, I'd have been arrested for that, which is why you fell back on Section 50, because you were being spiteful fucking c***s. But I had no legal protection there, did I? No, you took all of my legal protection away to stroke your own ego. They are no different just because they are police officers and servants of the Crown. Well, I beg to differ. Having viewed the body-worn video footage, I'm satisfied that Mr. Elliott appeared to be what I will describe as obstructive as he speaks over the officers. He appears to be argumentative and unhelpful throughout his interaction with all of the officers. Well, appearing to be something and actually being something, again, officer, are two different things. It may appear to rain later, but whether it does or not is a completely different matter. That may be an obscure comparison, but for something to appear like something and for something to actually be something is two completely different things. And considering that this is supposed to be, you've put your name to this file, you've put your name to this letter, and yet you're not afraid that you've put your name to this fairy tale fantasy of yours? I certainly would be. It says that I was obstructive as I spoke over the officers. I spoke over the officers maybe once or twice, I think, simply because I was trying to respond to them, but they wouldn't let me. They kept talking. Remember, there was 6 of them, or 8 of them at one point, but there was 6 of them, literally all throwing questions at me. I'm trying to respond to one of them asking me a question, and yet another one's talking to me, so I'm having to talk over them. Yes, of course. I certainly wasn't argumentative. I'm not going to agree with somebody who is wrong. For me, it was about what is true and what is false. Okay? What the police were saying to me was clearly false. They'd already lied about Section 44 of the Terrorism Act. They'd already used that, which was an illegal use of that. Then they were telling me that I was being annoying. Then they were telling me that people were feeling alarmed, harassed and distressed, and that they'd had complaints of this. But they hadn't. Nobody had complained about me being there. There is no evidence of any complaints about me being there prior to them coming out. The complaints that they have are complaints that were given in their witness reports, in their witness statements about the incident. Nobody had gone in and made a complaint which had been logged before they all came out to me. This would indicate that all of the fabrication is exactly that. It's a fabrication. They've all got together and colluded to cover each other's back. Because let's face it, 8 police officers or 6 police officers and 1 member of the public. Who is the majority of people going to believe? Unfortunately, they're going to believe the police officers because they believe police officers are truthful and honest and have integrity. Unfortunately, not anymore. During their interaction with Mr. Elliott, Constables Hunt and Thompson are joined by a number of colleagues, including Sergeant Green and Inspector Higham, who all appear from the body-worn video to try and assist with speaking to Mr. Elliott. No, what they were doing was trying to intimidate me. That's what they was doing. By Mr. Elliott's own admission, officers interacted with him for over 20 minutes prior to him being arrested. So yes, so 20 minutes of me explaining what I was doing and why I was doing it. I would have thought that at least one of the several idiots that were surrounding me would have looked it up on the internet. What is stock footage? Not difficult to do. Having considered this point, I'm satisfied that this only goes to demonstrate further how officers sought to engage with Mr. Elliott to establish who he was and the reasons for his actions prior to arresting him. What? No, it doesn't demonstrate how the officers sought to engage with me. It demonstrates that the police officers wouldn't leave it. They wouldn't accept my explanation for being there, and they wouldn't accept the fact that I was right and they was wrong. That's what it demonstrates clearly from the footage. Mr. Elliott refuses to provide his name and address when asked. From the body-worn video, it appears that Mr. Elliott continues to film officers, and he appears to produce a file of documents relating to filming in public and refers on camera to the legal references within the file that he believes permitted him to film in public. Well, those legal references, as you put it, weren't just legal references. They were from legislation.gov.uk. The details and the information I had in my folder were the legislations that you are supposed to adhere to and enforce. But yet none of you gave a shit about that at the time. You was quite happy to ignore legislation and to ignore my rights in order to satisfy your own pathetic need to give your ego a hard-on. There were clearly 2 pieces of legislation that were considered prior to the arrest of Mr. Elliott, and details of which are contained in pages 7 and 8 of the investigation report. I do not intend to repeat the details contained within that report again here. Link to that report is in the description, guys.